3 days ago, I stood in the rain, 2 suitcases in my hands, watching my own daughter lock me out of my house. The home I spent my entire life building now belonged to her. And me, the mother who raised her, who gave her everything, was thrown out like a stranger. But do you know what's even more shocking? Just 3 days later, that same daughter called me, sobbing, begging me to save her from losing everything. I used to think nothing could hurt more than being betrayed by your own blood. But I was wrong. Behind her coldness was a secret buried for years, an elaborate scheme worth tens of millions of dollars, and a truth about the man I once loved that would shatter everything I knew. This isn't just a story about a mother's heartbreak. It's about resilience, justice, and the moment a woman refuses to stay broken and decides to rise again. The house was too quiet after the funeral. Not the peaceful kind of quiet, but the heavy, echoing silence that feels like someone erased laughter from the air. Evelyn Hart sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of tea that had long gone cold. The steam had faded, just like the warmth in her life. Her husband's chair, still pulled halfway from the table, faced her like a ghost that refused to leave. For 40 years, this house had been their shared heartbeat. The walls filled with arguments, laughter, and quiet forgiveness. Now, every photo frame seemed to look away. Every ticking second from the clock felt like it was counting down to something she didn't want to face. That afternoon, her daughter Clara came home with her husband Dylan. They didn't bring flowers or warmth. They brought plans. "Mom," Clara began, her voice clipped and strangely formal. "We've been thinking, it's time you moved into Greenview. The retirement place. They'll take good care of you." Evelyn blinked. "Greenview? But this is my home. Your father and I." Dylan cut in, smiling the way people do when they've already made the decision for you. "It's just for the best, Evelyn. You'll have people around, activities, no more worrying about this big old house." Evelyn's chest tightened. The house. Her husband had built it board by board, saving from every paycheck, sanding each wooden stair until it gleamed like honey under the sunlight. He used to say, "This home will always have room for you, no matter what life throws your way." Now, that promise sounded like a cruel joke. "I'm fine here," she whispered. "This house isn't too much for me." Clara sighed. The sound of irritation, not love. "Mom, you're 72. You forget things, you get dizzy. This isn't safe anymore." And then, the words that cracked something deep inside Evelyn. "It's not even your house anymore. Dad wanted it to be mine. It's written down. He told me before he passed." For a moment, Evelyn couldn't breathe. She stared at her daughter, her only child. The same girl whose scraped knees she used to kiss, whose nightmares she used to calm with soft lullabies. Now those same lips formed words sharp enough to cut through decades of love. That night, Evelyn packed 2 suitcases under the watchful, impatient eyes of her daughter and son-in-law. She didn't cry, not in front of them. When the door clicked shut behind her, the sound echoed like a verdict. The street was cold. The house lights went off one by one, until the windows turned black, like eyes closing on a memory that no longer mattered. Evelyn stood there for a moment, the night wind tugging at her coat. Her reflection in the window was faint, small, almost erased. She whispered to herself, "You built a home, and it forgot you." Hours later, in a small roadside motel with flickering lights and a smell of old cigarettes, Evelyn sat on the bed with her 2 suitcases at her feet. The room hummed with the loneliness of strangers who had stayed before her, a silence that had learned how to listen. She took out her husband's old journal, the one bound in brown leather, worn soft from years of his hands. She had brought it without thinking, the way one carries an old photograph through a storm. She opened it to the last page and a small folded note slipped out, so thin it almost floated to the floor. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakably his. "If you're reading this, it means they've betrayed us." Evelyn froze. The words blurred for a moment before her tears cleared them again. Betrayed? By who? Her mind raced. The hurried conversations Clara had with Dylan behind closed doors, the strange visits from lawyers she wasn't allowed to meet, the missing envelope Charles said he'd mailed weeks before he died. Pieces started falling into place, jagged and cruel. She looked around the small motel room, its peeling wallpaper and humming refrigerator. For the first time since the funeral, she felt something other than grief. It wasn't peace. It was fire. They had taken her home, her security, her dignity. But now, they had also given her a reason to fight. That night, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling. Every sound outside, the passing cars, the hum of the neon sign, felt like a reminder. You're not done yet. The note rested on her nightstand, next to a cup of untouched water. Her husband's words echoed in her mind, steady and unyielding. If you're reading this, it means they've betrayed us. She thought of Clara, the way her daughter's eyes had hardened, the way she had looked at her not with love, but calculation. And Dylan, always hovering behind her, whispering, guiding, controlling. Evelyn turned on the bedside lamp, picked up the note again, and this time she noticed something she hadn't before. Faint indentations on the paper, like someone had written another line on the page above it. She held it under the light. The shadowed words came alive, faint but legible. Talk to Richard. Richard Coleman, her husband's lawyer, the man who hadn't shown up at the funeral. Her pulse quickened. Maybe her husband had seen this coming. Maybe he had left something behind, a key, a document, a truth. Evelyn folded the note carefully, placed it back into the journal, and exhaled. The ache in her chest was still there, but beneath it, something new was growing, a quiet resolve. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't afraid of tomorrow. She looked at her reflection in the motel mirror. Tired eyes, wrinkled hands, but a spark that refused to die. "All right, Charles," she whispered. "If they've betrayed us, let's see what else they've hidden." The night outside was still, but in that small motel room, something had shifted. An old woman had decided to stop mourning and start uncovering the truth. And in doing so, she began the journey of reclaiming not just her home, but herself. Room 204 sat at the end of a damp hallway, where the flickering fluorescent light trembled like the fading breath of a weary soul. The smell of disinfectant mingled with mold, seeping through the cracked walls, making Evelyn feel as if she were living inside a forgotten memory. Outside, rain drummed on the tin roof, echoing the ticking clock that once filled her old home. A sound that used to accompany evenings of laughter, now reduced to a hollow echo. 3 days ago, she had been thrown out of the very house she had lived in for most of her life. Today she sat in a shabby motel room, surrounded by 2 suitcases and a heart hollowed by loss. At 73, people usually longed for peace, the quiet warmth of family, the comfort of familiar walls, the gentle glow of morning light. But Evelyn was different. Life had chosen her to witness a colder truth. Even the homes you build can turn against you. She opened the old suitcase. Inside lay folders, documents, and a copy of her late husband's will. Charles Hart. Everything was arranged too neatly, as if an invisible hand had placed them there, waiting for her to look back. Evelyn had never planned to reopen these papers. Even a glance could make her chest tighten with grief. But tonight, under the dim yellow light, something urged her on. Maybe it was pain, maybe instinct, or maybe the faint, trembling sense that she was standing before the door to truth itself. She turned the pages. The weak light glinted across her wrinkled cheeks, where the years had carved delicate lines of sorrow. Everything appeared in order. Charles's signature, dates, notarization stamps. But when Evelyn reached the second page, her eyes froze. The signing dates didn't match. One document was dated June 2nd, the other, July 9th. Charles had died on July 8th. Her heart clenched. She studied the handwriting. Same tilt, same ink stroke, identical pressure, too identical. Too perfect to be real. The room grew silent, suffocatingly so. Rain still tapped against the window, each drop falling like a memory returning to life. Evelyn closed her eyes, inhaled deeply, trying to suppress the shiver crawling up her spine. She wondered, if the truth was buried within these papers, did she have the courage to dig it up, knowing it might destroy every last piece of faith she had left? Evelyn spread the papers neatly across the bed, dissecting them like a surgeon examining a mystery. As she compared each sheet, she realized the will was missing a page. Page 5 of 6. Gone. Someone had torn it out, carefully, deliberately, as if erasing the fingerprints of guilt. In her mind flashed the image of Clara, her daughter, the one with Charles's eyes, but a gaze that had grown colder over the years. Evelyn remembered the funeral. Clara had insisted on handling all the legal documents. Evelyn had trusted her like only a mother could, blindly, completely. Now the memories came crashing down like shards of broken glass. The rushed voice, the evasive eyes, the hollow embrace. Each piece fit together, forming a picture painted in betrayal, shaded by a mother's love turned naive. She stood up, picked up her phone. Beneath the fragile shell of age, a flame flickered to life, not one of hatred but of awakening. The name Richard Coleman appeared on the screen. Charles's lawyer. The man who once said, "If anything ever happens, call me." She hesitated for a moment, then pressed call. One ring, two, three. Richard Coleman speaking. His voice was low, calm. Evelyn's reply was soft but sharp as a blade. "It's me, Evelyn Hart." Silence. Then surprise in his tone. "Evelyn, God, I thought you'd settled down in Lakewood. Are you all right?" "No," she said with a faint, bitter smile. "That house isn't mine anymore." Evelyn told him everything. The rain-soaked night, the eviction, the mismatched dates on the will. On the other end, Richard said nothing for nearly 5 minutes. Then, a deep sigh. "Evelyn," he spoke slowly, "did you say July 9th? But Charles died on the 8th. Her hand trembled. "I know." A heavy pause. Then Richard continued, his tone firm but subdued. "You asked about the original? I still have it. According to my records, the genuine will was signed June 2nd. And Evelyn, you are the main beneficiary. The house, the assets, the investments, all under your name. I always assumed you had already received them." The air froze. The rain outside pounded harder against the window pane. Evelyn felt the world tilt, ever so slightly. "So, Clara forged everything," she whispered, her voice unsteady but sure. Richard exhaled, his voice low, but each word landed like the strike of a gavel. "If that's true, Evelyn, this isn't just betrayal. It's organized fraud, and it could change everything." Evelyn looked up at the old mirror. The face staring back was no longer that of a frail mother thrown into the rain. It was the face of a woman who had finally learned. Kindness needs boundaries. Outside, the neon sign reading Motel 204 flickered in the storm. Glowing, fading, glowing again, like the heartbeat of a destiny awakening. Evelyn murmured, almost to herself, "Then the game has only just begun." The morning sky hung low, gray as ashes. Wind slid through the cracks of the old window, sharp and cold, brushing against Evelyn's skin. She sat still on a worn-out bench across the police precinct, clutching a folder filled with documents, her last hope of reclaiming the truth. When Detective Renee Miller entered the room, the air shifted. Her presence was calm but cutting, like a scalpel. Every gesture of Evelyn's was silently examined, every tremor of fear reflected in the detective's sharp, watchful eyes. And yet, beneath that steel, there was understanding, the quiet empathy of someone who had known betrayal too. "Mrs. Hart," Renee said, her voice steady, low, deliberate. "You're not imagining this, but what you're facing was designed to be perfect." She opened her laptop. Lines of data, signatures, and digital seals flickered across the screen, each one a wound reopening. Forged documents, fabricated contracts, false transfers. Dylan, her son-in-law, the man she once trusted to care for her daughter, had paid a cyberforensics firm to fabricate a flawless paper trail, rerouting every asset her husband once owned. Even the National Registry hadn't detected the fraud. Renee exhaled. "He moved the entire estate into an offshore trust. Nothing's left under your name." Then she turned the screen, her tone darkening. "And there's someone else involved. Have you ever heard of the broker?" The name fell heavy, like a blade hitting the floor. Evelyn frowned. "Broker? As in a financial dealer?" Renee nodded slowly. "A ghost in the system? A financial architect who launders money for billionaires and criminals alike. No photos, no trace, only rumors, and chaos in his wake." The wind outside screamed through the alley, echoing like a warning. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She remembered Dylan's calm, calculated eyes, how she once mistook that for confidence. Now she recognized it for what it was. Cold, deliberate control. "Do you have proof he's met this broker?" she asked, her voice trembling. Renee's fingers danced across the keyboard, and a single photo appeared. A surveillance still. Dylan, stepping out of a high-end restaurant, shaking hands with a man in a black suit, his face half hidden by shadow. Below it, a small note in blurred text. "The broker, international financial suspect." Evelyn stared, her breath caught in her throat. Her world, her family, shattered once again. The dinners, the laughter, the warmth she had built, all of it had been hollow. But then, from deep within the chaos, something stirred. A memory. Her husband's handwriting, trembling yet precise. "If you're reading this, It means they've betrayed us. He knew. Charles knew. He must have left something behind. A clue, a thread, a key. Renee closed the laptop softly. Mrs. Hart, what we have is only the surface, but if you're ready, I'll help you dig deeper. Evelyn lifted her gaze. Her eyes were no longer tired, they were burning. I've already lost everything, detective. Now I only want one thing, justice. Renee's lips curved in a faint smile. Then let's begin. That night, the city glowed under the rain. Evelyn sat by her window staring at the reflection of streetlights rippling on the wet glass. The photo of her family rested on the table beside her. Dylan's arm wrapped around Clara, their smiles perfect, polished, deceitful. A perfect crime, she thought. But nothing perfect lasts. Every masterpiece of deception has a crack. You just have to find where to strike. She whispered into the silence. Charles, if you saw this coming, tell me where to start. Lightning flashed, flooding the room in white light. A single sheet of paper slid from a book on the shelf. The Art of Integrity. Her husband's favorite. There, scrawled along the margin in fading ink, were the words, If our daughter ever betrays me, give this to Richard. Evelyn froze. Her fingers trembled as she opened the book further, and saw it, a hidden USB drive, wedged inside the binding. Her heart pounded like thunder. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was the crack in their perfect crime. It had been raining since dawn. Raindrops fell softly against the fogged cafe window where Evelyn and Detective Renee Miller sat across from each other. The air was thick with the smell of burnt coffee and silence. Renee placed a worn yellow envelope on the table, the red seal of the Department of Treasury still intact. You should prepare yourself, Renee said slowly, her voice steady, measuring the trembling rhythm of the woman before her. What's inside may change everything you thought you knew about your husband. Evelyn's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were old, yellowed papers sealed years ago. The embossed name Charles Hart stood out in fading ink. She read line after line, and something inside her began to collapse. Not faith, but the image of a man she once believed she knew completely. Charles Hart, a brilliant accountant, a devoted husband, a caring father, had once been an advisor to an international money laundering network. They used Silicon Valley startups as facades, cleansing dirty money through flawless financial reports that even the government failed to detect. Evelyn's breath caught when she reached the final page. In the investigator's handwriting was a note. Evidence suggests Hart cooperated with foreign investors, likely aware of the Black Fund's origin. She dropped the file, a chill running through her veins. Not fear, but disbelief. The man who had held her every night, who promised we'll grow old in peace, had lived with a darkness she'd never seen. Renee watched her carefully, her eyes no longer those of a detective, but of a woman who had witnessed too many truths crumble. Evelyn, she said softly, love can blind us, but truth, no matter how cruel, is the only thing that can set us free. Evelyn said nothing. She gazed out the rain-streaked window, watching the water wash the dust off the streets. Perhaps she, too, needed a storm like that. That night, Evelyn returned to her tiny motel room. The air smelled of damp wood and mold. She placed the file on the table and turned on the dim lamp. Its yellow light spilled across her wrinkled face, lines etched by time and by grief. She looked at a framed photo of Charles, their wedding photo, old and silver-edged. His eyes were still as gentle as she remembered. Evelyn gave a bitter smile. What did you hide from me, Charles? She whispered. She flipped to the last page of the file. Renee had added a note. Dylan once worked for a financial firm, a subsidiary of this same Black Fund network. Evelyn froze. Her heart pounded like the rain beating on the tin roof. Dylan, her son-in-law, connected to the same web her husband once served. Could this be more than the sins of the past? Was history repeating itself one generation later? A terrifying thought crept in. Were Clara and Dylan continuing Charles's crimes, or had they become victims of the very thing he once tried to stop? The next morning, Renee called. Her tone was urgent. Evelyn, I found something else in the old archives. Charles was threatened before he died. Someone wanted him silent, forever. Evelyn stood still. The pieces began to spin in her mind like a storm. Why did Charles write in his journal, "If you're reading this, it means they've betrayed us"? How did Dylan forge the will so perfectly? And where did the $33 million suddenly come from? Each question echoed through the small room. Evelyn understood. This was no longer about money. It was about truth, about the honor of a man long gone, and her last chance to reclaim herself. She gripped the file tightly, her eyes glinting with a strength she hadn't felt in years. "Renee," she said into the phone, "I'll find out what really happened, even if I have to dig through the past itself." That night, she lay staring at the ceiling. The rain fell again, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. She remembered Charles working late in his study, the soft lamplight on his graying hair. He had once said, "Evelyn, there are things you shouldn't know, because the more you know, the deeper you'll be pulled in." Now she knew. And as he warned, there was no turning back. Outside, the streetlights flickered. For a moment, Evelyn saw her reflection in the mirror. No longer the frail woman cast out of her own home, but someone stepping into the battlefield of truth. A war not just to expose guilt, but to answer the question that haunted her: who truly betrayed whom? As dawn broke, Evelyn left the motel. In her hands was the resealed file and a new resolve. She was heading to her old house to find the book Charles once cherished, The Art of Integrity. She didn't yet know that hidden inside that book was the key, a small USB drive holding everything: the money, the crimes, and the proof that would tear the Hart family apart. The rain that night fell like silver threads, soft, cold, endless. Evelyn stood before the iron gates of her old house, the place that once held a lifetime of love, now nothing more than a hollow shell of memories. The hinges groaned as she pushed the gate open, a sound that pierced through the silence like a sigh from the house itself, as if it were asking, "Why have you come back?" Inside, everything was frozen in time. Dust-coated photo frames lined the walls. The cream curtains hung limp, the scent of lavender still faint on the sofa, a ghost of warmth that once lived here. Evelyn moved slowly, afraid that even a careless step might shatter the fragile remains of what used to be her world. On the bookshelf, untouched and perfectly aligned, sat the volumes Charles once loved to read under the soft afternoon light. Her fingers traced each spine until they stopped at a familiar one: The Art of Integrity. It was his favorite. He used to say, "Integrity isn't about being flawless, it's about facing the darkness within yourself and not looking away." A sad smile brushed across her lips. Charles had always been the calm one, a man who hid his storms behind quiet eyes. But in those eyes, there was always something unspoken, something she never dared to name. Evelyn opened the book. A small piece of paper slipped out, like the book had finally exhaled a secret it had held for too long. The handwriting was unmistakably his, slightly shaky, in blue ink. "Give this to Richard if our daughter ever betrays you." Her breath caught. Beneath the back cover, taped securely, was a tiny USB drive, light as air, yet heavy as guilt. For a moment, the entire room fell silent. The only sound was the rhythmic beat of her heart, strong, steady, but trembling beneath the weight of revelation. Betrayal. The word sliced through her mind like a blade. Images flashed: Clara's laughter, Dylan's gentle smile, the handshake at the funeral that felt colder than grief itself. With trembling hands, Evelyn plugged the USB into Charles's old laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing rows upon rows of files. Spreadsheets, bank ledgers, encrypted documents. She scrolled down, her pulse quickening. Then she saw it. A single name that made her stomach twist: Dylan Coleman, her son-in-law, the man who called her Mom, the man who once promised, "I'll take care of Clara, I'll protect what your husband built." Every word, every smile had been a lie. The files revealed an intricate web of transactions: shell companies across Europe and Asia, offshore accounts, forged investments, tens of millions of dollars, the illusion of stability built on deceit. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes, not from pain, but from the sharp sting of awakening. Charles had known. Somehow he had seen it coming. He hadn't left her alone in the dark. He had left her the key. For the first time in years, Evelyn felt something shift inside her. The woman who had been cast out, humiliated, forgotten, was gone. In her place stood someone fierce, steady, and unbreakable. Charles's voice seemed to echo from the walls, calm, resolute. "If you're reading this, it means the time has come. Trust yourself." She closed her fist around the USB. Outside, the rain had stopped. Mist clung to the windows, blurring the world beyond, as if time itself was holding its breath. In the reflection of the glass, Evelyn saw a face she almost didn't recognize, strong, determined, and alive again. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. Not in farewell, but in resolution. The small USB glimmered under the streetlight, a spark of truth in a world built on lies. Because she knew now, this wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a war she never asked for, but was destined to win. When Evelyn walked away from her old home that night, she carried more than a USB drive. She carried the soul of a storm waiting to break. In a world where greed buries love and betrayal wears the face of family, the key Charles left behind wasn't just to unlock the truth. It was to unleash a reckoning. And 3 days later, when the phone rang and Clara's trembling voice begged for help, Evelyn would have to make the hardest choice of her life. That morning, the city was still draped in mist. Evelyn sat by the narrow window of her small rented room, a cup of tea long gone cold in her hands. The pale light touched her face, a face once gentle and warm, now etched with the quiet scars of betrayal. 3 days. It had only been 3 days since her daughter threw her out of the house. 3 days since the woman who gave everything to her family became a ghost in her own life. But in those 3 days, grief had hardened into something else, steel. Cold, quiet, and sharp enough to cut through any lie. Then the phone rang. A sound so ordinary, yet it sliced through the silence like a blade. Evelyn glanced at the screen. A single name blinked: Clara. For a moment, she didn't move. The memories rushed in like a storm. Her little girl's laughter, the bedtime stories, the birthday candles. And then that same girl's face, stone cold, as she slammed the door in her mother's face under the rain. Evelyn finally answered. Her daughter's voice trembled with panic. "Mom, please, you have to help us. All our accounts have been frozen. The lawyer said it needs your signature to unlock them. Please, Mom, I'm begging you." No arrogance, no entitlement, only fear. Pure, desperate fear. The same woman who once declared, "This house is mine now," was now drowning in her own downfall. Evelyn closed her eyes. She inhaled slowly. Once, twice. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, smooth as ice, and devastatingly steady. "Now you know what it feels like to lose everything, Clara." There was silence on the other end. Then came the sound of quiet sobbing. Small, fragile, human. Evelyn didn't hang up. She listened. Not out of pity, but out of closure. For the first time, her heart didn't break. It settled. When the line went dead, Evelyn placed the phone gently on the table. She turned to the small drawer beside her bed and opened it. Inside lay the flash drive her late husband, Charles, had hidden for years. A tiny object, but one that could change everything. There were nights when she'd held it, unsure whether to open it or destroy it. But now, she knew what she had to do. Inside that drive were records. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, secret ledgers, proof that Dylan, her son-in-law, had orchestrated an elaborate international fraud. And Clara had signed her name on every page. Evelyn put on her husband's old sweater, the one that still carried his faint scent of cedar and rain. Outside, the afternoon sun was beginning to break through the fog. The light glinted off puddles in the street as she walked, steady, deliberate, unstoppable. When she arrived at the police station, she looked like any other aging widow. But her eyes told another story, one of loss, endurance, and a fire that refused to die. The officer at the counter looked up. "Ma'am, how can we help you today?" Evelyn's voice was soft, but every syllable landed with quiet authority. "I'm here to begin again, and to end this." She placed the flash drive on the counter. The officer hesitated, then took it. Within minutes, the room shifted. Phones started ringing. Doors slammed. Agents appeared from nowhere. A storm of movement, triggered by a single act of courage. And just like that, Operation Legacy was born. Evelyn was no longer the victim. She was the witness. The key, the spark that would bring down a web of deceit stretching farther than she'd ever imagined. As she stepped back outside, the wind caught her silver hair, scattering it across her face. The sun dipped low, breaking into shards of gold across the street. Evelyn smiled faintly. It wasn't a smile of triumph. It was peace. The quiet kind that only comes after you've walked through hell and refused to burn. Some phone calls aren't meant for forgiveness. They're meant to wake you up, to remind you that mercy and justice are not always the same thing. Evelyn got into her car. The engine roared to life. The city lights flickered on, one by one, as dusk settled over the horizon. For the first time in years, she felt like she was driving toward something, not away. A chapter had closed. But Evelyn Hart's story was far from over. That morning, the courtroom was thick with silence, so heavy you could almost hear people breathing. The white light from the ceiling reflected off the polished wooden tables where three people, once a family, now sat on opposite sides, as enemies. Clara, hair neatly tied back, eyes swollen from sleepless nights, clenched her trembling hands. Dylan sat a few feet away, his expression cold, his gaze like steel. And in the witness stand, Evelyn, the mother who had been betrayed, rested her palms on her lap, her chin lifted with quiet defiance. No one spoke, but the air was electric, the kind of silence that feels like it's about to break apart. The gavel struck. Court is now in session. The judge's voice, calm but commanding, filled the room. Case number 4021, the estate of Charles Hart versus Clara and Dylan Sanders. Charges, estate fraud and falsification of legal documents. Clara inhaled sharply. Her eyes met her mother's, just for a moment. The contact was brief, cold, like two shards of ice colliding midair. Dylan was the first to speak. She planned all of this. Clara was the mastermind. I only followed her orders. She's the one who hired the digital forgers and tricked me into signing those papers. Clara turned toward him, her voice trembling yet fiery. You liar. You were the one who started this. You made me believe it was legal. You said it was just a transfer. Their voices echoed across the room. Anger, fear, betrayal. Blending into chaos. The judge banged the gavel for silence, but the tension was too thick to contain. Then came the voice of Richard Coleman, Evelyn's attorney. Calm, steady, but sharp as a blade. Your Honor, we have the official results from the Department of Justice's Digital Forensics Unit. He placed a thick folder on the table. Every document submitted by the defendants, the will, the signature pages, the verification forms, were generated by handwriting and image simulation software. None of them are authentic. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Clara froze, her breath catching. That's impossible. I just signed what Dylan gave me, she whispered, her voice cracking. Dylan didn't move. His face was carved from stone. Say something, Clara shouted. You told me it was a power of attorney. You said it was legal. The judge looked down, the silence returning. Deeper now, heavier, as if the air itself had turned to glass. Richard continued, his tone low but unrelenting. And this, Your Honor, is the final piece. He pressed a button. On the large screen appeared a line of text from a decrypted bank log. Transfer, $10,000, account Charles Hart, date, 3 days before death. A murmur spread through the courtroom like a current. Evelyn's eyes widened. Her lips trembled. Clara turned toward her mother, whispering, almost in disbelief, Dad, transferred the money? But why? No one answered. Charles Hart, the man they all thought they knew, seemed to hover over the room like a ghost, silent yet omnipresent. Had he foreseen the betrayal? Or was there another truth buried beneath the lies? Outside, rain began to tap against the windows. Evelyn listened, each drop sounding like a heartbeat, like fragments of her past echoing back to her. Dinner tables, laughter, the warmth of family, all gone, shattered into pieces too small to mend. And yet, amid the chaos, a strange calm washed over her. Because finally, the truth, no matter how cruel, had come to light. She turned to Clara, not with anger, but with an aching tenderness. You chose money over love, my dear, she said softly. But you forgot, justice cannot be bought. Clara lowered her head, tears blurring her vision. Dylan looked away, his jaw tightening as fear crept behind his composure. Outside, thunder cracked through the sky, illuminating the sign on the courthouse wall, United States District Court. A chapter was closing, and Evelyn knew that behind this door, another truth was waiting to be born. As the courtroom emptied, Richard walked over to her. Maybe Charles did it to protect you, he said gently. Or maybe he left behind the key to something we still don't understand. Evelyn nodded slowly, her gaze drifting to the rain-streaked window. Maybe, she whispered, what he left wasn't money at all, but a question. And that question that haunting, unanswered truth, was only the beginning. Because what came next would unravel everything they thought they knew about Charles Hart. The late afternoon light spilled softly across Richard's office, casting long shadows over the neatly arranged files on his desk. Evelyn sat across from him, her hands trembling around a cup of coffee gone cold. In her eyes, grief still lingered, but beneath it, something else flickered: fear and hope. Richard exhaled slowly, his voice low and steady. "Evelyn," he said, "it's time you know the truth about Charles." The sound of her husband's name froze the air between them. She looked up, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean? What truth?" Richard opened a worn leather briefcase and pulled out a folder marked with the seal of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. "Charles wasn't a criminal," he said carefully. "He was a confidential informant for the Financial Crimes Task Force. His mission was to expose a massive money laundering network, the very same one your son-in-law Dylan is involved in." Evelyn's breath caught. The words struck her like thunder. All those quiet nights, the long hours in his study, the guarded look in his eyes, they all began to make sense. Her husband hadn't been living a double life out of guilt. He had been living one, out of duty. For years, Charles had secretly gathered evidence, feeding intel to federal agents, mapping out a web of shell companies and offshore accounts that hid billions in dirty money. He had lived every day walking a razor's edge, a loving husband by day, a silent informant by night. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes. "Then his death," she began, her voice breaking. Richard lowered his gaze. "It wasn't a heart attack, Evelyn. Not exactly. There are signs it might have been something else, something orchestrated." The silence in the room deepened, heavy, suffocating. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, as if the world itself was holding its breath for the man whose truth had been buried too long. Richard slid an envelope across the table. "He wanted you to have this," he said. "It came through the Witness Protection Program. The $33 million, it's not stolen money, it's a protected compensation fund placed under your name." Evelyn opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was an official certificate and a handwritten note, the ink slightly faded. "If you're reading this, it means I've done my part. Live, Evelyn. Don't let them erase who we are." Her tears fell freely now. The words carried his voice, the warmth, the quiet strength, the promise. Every moment of doubt she'd ever had about him collapsed into one shattering realization. He had died protecting her. Richard's tone softened. "The federal agents want to meet with you," he said. "You're not just a widow, Evelyn. You're the key witness in one of the largest financial crime cases in the country." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she straightened her back. "Charles protected me," she murmured. "Now it's my turn to protect him." Richard nodded, watching her rise, a woman who had lost everything, yet was somehow standing taller than ever before. As Evelyn stepped out of the office, sunlight flooded the steps outside, glinting off her silver hair like a quiet crown. The wind lifted, cool and clean, carrying the scent of something new. Justice. On the drive home, Evelyn stared out the window, the city rolling by like a film reel of her life. Pain still pulsed beneath her ribs, but so did pride. Charles had lived in the shadows to keep her safe. Now she would walk into the light to honor him. That night, she opened his old journal again. Between pages of careful notes and reflections, she found one line underlined twice. "Truth doesn't need believers, only those brave enough to stand for it." Evelyn closed her eyes. For the first time in months, she felt peace. Tomorrow she would meet the federal agents. Tomorrow she would face the people who destroyed her family. Tomorrow, Evelyn Hart would no longer be a victim. She would be the voice of truth itself. The new apartment sat high above the city, bathed in the gold of a fading sunset. Light spilled through the wide glass windows, stretching across the wooden floor like silk. Everything was perfectly arranged. No clutter, no chaos. Just like the woman who lived there. Calm on the surface, but beneath her stillness, a quiet storm brewed. That afternoon, the phone rang. Clara's voice trembled on the other end, fragile and desperate, like rain before a storm. "Mom, I just want to talk. Please. Let's stop hating each other. I just want to see you, that's all." Evelyn paused for a moment. The words sounded tender, but something sharp and cold prickled at the edge of her intuition. She'd learned the hard way. People who betray you rarely call just to apologize. The peace meeting was set for 6 p.m. Clara said Dylan would be there too. "We just want to clear the air, Mom. I promise, nothing bad." Evelyn smiled, slowly, faintly. No one could tell what hid behind that smile. She agreed to come, but not unprepared. Beneath the collar of her beige coat, a small recording device was pinned discreetly. And in the parking garage below, an unmarked black car waited, FBI agents listening to every breath through her wire. When Evelyn entered the apartment, Clara rushed forward. Her daughter looked thinner, paler, her eyes swollen from tears or sleepless nights. Maybe both. 3 cups of coffee sat on the table. Too perfect, too staged. Dylan was already seated, crisp white shirt, silver watch glinting under the light. He smiled, but it wasn't warmth, it was control. "Thank you for coming," he said smoothly. "All we need is one signature, and this nightmare ends. No one has to get hurt." Evelyn sat down calmly, setting her purse on her lap. The paper in front of her, a liability waiver. Each line of text as cold as a blade, cutting away her inheritance, her rights, her proof. "And if I don't sign?" she asked softly, eyes steady as glass. Dylan leaned forward, voice low and dark. "If you don't sign, you'll regret it." The air thickened. Clara lowered her head, hands trembling in her lap. Evelyn looked at her daughter, the child she once held, the woman now drowning in greed, and for a fleeting moment, sorrow crossed her eyes. Not for herself, but for the soul her daughter had lost. "You know, Clara," she said quietly, "I've lost many things in my life, but there's one thing I never lost. Myself." The moment Dylan reached across the table, the world exploded. The back window burst open, footsteps thundered, voices cut through the tension like sirens of judgment. "FBI, hands where we can see them!" The room froze. Dylan stumbled back, eyes wide. What the hell? Agents swarmed. The sound of metal cuffs clicked sharp and final. Clara collapsed into her chair, face drained of color, tears streaming silently. Evelyn didn't move. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes were calm. Dylan turned toward her, his voice a snarl, his pride fractured into rage. "You don't know what you've done. You've just made enemies in powerful places." Evelyn met his glare. "Power doesn't lie in money, Dylan," she said softly. "It lies in truth." Outside, red and blue lights painted the night. The reflection flickered across Evelyn's face, a haunting mix of exhaustion and peace. Clara was escorted out, her head bowed, her wrists cuffed. Evelyn stood by the window, silent. She wasn't angry anymore. She wasn't even broken. She was simply done. Because she realized the deepest pain wasn't being betrayed. It was watching someone you love lose themselves to the darkness of greed. That night, alone in her apartment, Evelyn sat by the window. The city glittered below, untouched, unaware, endless. She opened her notebook and wrote, "Justice isn't revenge. It's light, revealing the shadows we once feared to face." Then she put the pen down and looked out again. The curtain fluttered softly in the evening breeze, and in that light she seemed reborn. No longer the woman cast out. No longer the victim of deceit. But a survivor, reshaped by pain, refined by truth. That morning, the city sky was heavy and gray, as if it too carried a sorrow it couldn't name. The courtroom was packed. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, eyes followed every breath of the woman in the front row. Evelyn Hart. She sat still, her silver hair tied neatly back, fingers gripping the old handkerchief her late husband once gave her. On the stand stood her daughter, Clara. The orange prison uniform looked too harsh against the pale lights above. The attorney spoke quietly, his voice echoing like a tired confession. "My client accepts the plea deal. 18 months. No tears, no applause. Only the dull scratching of pens signing papers and the metallic thud of the cell door closing. Cold, final, irreversible." Dylan, Clara's deceitful husband, received 5 years. His eyes brushed past Evelyn's for just a second, something between hatred and regret, before he was led away in cuffs. In that silent courtroom, only one thing lingered between mother and daughter. A distance that no verdict, no apology, no amount of money could bridge. Evelyn never went back to court. She didn't read the headlines, didn't watch the news, didn't answer a single call from journalists. Instead, she returned to her old home, restored, spotless, but hollow. The cracks in the walls were gone, yet the fractures inside her heart remained untouched. That first night, she sat alone by the window. The full moon hung like a quiet clock, ticking away the seconds of her solitude. On the table lay an envelope, No return address, only 3 words written in trembling ink. To Mother. She opened it. The handwriting was faint, but unmistakable. I don't want the money. I don't want the house. I just want you to forgive me. I thought I understood everything. Power, control, success. But when I lost you, I realized the most valuable thing I ever had wasn't in a safe. It was in your eyes. Evelyn placed the letter down. No tears fell. Only a deep, weighted breath, the kind that carries both grief and release. Forgiveness. The word echoed through her mind, soft yet haunting. Forgiveness wasn't about letting someone else feel peace. It was about setting herself free. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Weeks passed. One afternoon, an old friend visited. Are you really going to live like this forever? Evelyn smiled faintly. No, I'm going to start over. Instead of replying to Clara's letter, she used what remained of her inheritance to create something new. A national hotline for victims of family fraud and betrayal. She called it Heartline, a name that, for the first time in years, made her heart beat with purpose again. At first, people doubted it. But within months, hundreds of calls poured in. Broken voices, silent cries, stories that sounded achingly familiar. And Evelyn listened, patiently, compassionately, as if each call was a mirror reflecting her own pain. One evening, the phone rang. A man's voice, calm yet cautious. Mrs. Hart, this is David from the New York Chronicle. We'd like to feature your story. Evelyn chuckled softly. For once, someone wants to hear my story, and not because of the money. He hesitated. There's more. Netflix wants to adapt your life into a series. Outside, the sky was painted in a blazing sunset. Evelyn looked out the window. The light washed over her face like quiet redemption. For the first time, she felt truly at peace. She had lost everything. But in return, she had found something no fortune could ever buy, herself. That night, she unfolded Clara's letter again. The candlelight flickered, painting shadows that looked almost like memories. She wasn't sure when forgiveness truly began, or if it ever ended, but perhaps it had already started the moment she stopped hating. Next to the letter lay another sheet, a sketch for expanding Heartline nationwide. Evelyn took a pen and wrote the final lines. You took so much from me, but you also taught me how to take myself back. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the strongest way to say, I survived. That morning, the city sky was heavy and gray, as if it too carried a sorrow it couldn't name. The courtroom was packed, cameras flashed, reporters whispered, eyes followed every breath of the woman in the front row. Evelyn Hart. She sat still, her silver hair tied neatly back, fingers gripping the old handkerchief her late husband once gave her. On the stand stood her daughter, Clara. The orange prison uniform looked too harsh against the pale lights above. The attorney spoke quietly, his voice echoing like a tired confession. My client accepts the plea deal. 18 months. No tears, no applause. Only the dull scratching of pens signing papers and the metallic thud of the cell door closing. Cold, final, irreversible. Dylan, Clara's deceitful husband, received 5 years. His eyes brushed past Evelyn's for just a second, something between hatred and regret, before he was led away in cuffs. In that silent courtroom, only one thing lingered between mother and daughter. A distance that no verdict, no apology, no amount of money could bridge. Evelyn never went back to court. She didn't read the headlines, didn't watch the news, didn't answer a single call from journalists. Instead, she returned to her old home, restored, spotless, but hollow. The cracks in the walls were gone, yet the fractures inside her heart remained untouched. That first night, she sat alone by the window. The full moon hung like a quiet clock, ticking away the seconds of her solitude. On the table lay an envelope, no return address, only 3 words written in trembling ink. To Mother. She opened it. The handwriting was faint but unmistakable. I don't want the money. I don't want the house. I just want you to forgive me. I thought I understood everything. Power, control, success. But when I lost you, I realized the most valuable thing I ever had wasn't in a safe. It was in your eyes. Evelyn placed the letter down. No tears fell. Only a deep weighted breath, the kind that carries both grief and release. Forgiveness. The word echoed through her mind, soft yet haunting. Forgiveness wasn't about letting someone else feel peace. It was about setting herself free. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. Weeks passed. One afternoon, an old friend visited. "Are you really going to live like this forever?" Evelyn smiled faintly. "No, I'm going to start over." Instead of replying to Clara's letter, she used what remained of her inheritance to create something new. A national hotline for victims of family fraud and betrayal. She called it Heartline, a name that, for the first time in years, made her heart beat with purpose again. At first, people doubted it, but within months, hundreds of calls poured in. Broken voices, silent cries, stories that sounded achingly familiar. And Evelyn listened, patiently, compassionately, as if each call was a mirror reflecting her own pain. One evening, the phone rang. A man's voice, calm yet cautious. "Mrs. Hart, this is David from the New York Chronicle. We'd like to feature your story." Evelyn chuckled softly. "For once, someone wants to hear my story, and not because of the money." He hesitated. "There's more. Netflix wants to adapt your life into a series." Outside, the sky was painted in a blazing sunset. Evelyn looked out the window. The light washed over her face like quiet redemption. For the first time, she felt truly at peace. She had lost everything, but in return she had found something no fortune could ever buy: herself. That night, she unfolded Clara's letter again. The candlelight flickered, painting shadows that looked almost like memories. She wasn't sure when forgiveness truly began, or if it ever ended, but perhaps it had already started the moment she stopped hating. Next to the letter lay another sheet, a sketch for expanding Heartline nationwide. Evelyn took a pen and wrote the final lines. "You took so much from me, but you also taught me how to take myself back. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's the strongest way to say, I survived." As the morning light spilled through the window, Evelyn stepped onto the porch and looked toward the long road ahead. No tears, no anger, only the quiet strength of a woman who had learned how to rise from the ashes. But somewhere else, another hand was writing a new letter. Another shadow was preparing to return. 6 months have passed since the night Evelyn Hart lost everything: her home, her faith, and the people she thought would never betray her. But today, as she walks through the iron gates of her newly rebuilt house, she is no longer the woman who stood in the rain clutching 2 suitcases. She has risen from the ashes. The house looks nothing like the place that once witnessed tears and betrayal. The walls gleam with light, the air feels alive. Above the front door, a simple plaque reads, "The Hart Foundation, protecting the elderly from financial exploitation." Every step she takes across the polished tiles feels like reclaiming a piece of herself. Her fingers trail across the balcony railing, the same one where Clara once shouted at her, now wrapped in lavender vines. The scent floats gently in the air, not as a reminder of pain, but as a symbol of peace. When Evelyn opens the front door, a reporter and camera crew are waiting. Lights flash. She stands tall, calm, unshaken. "They erased me once," she says, her voice firm but steady, "but I've written myself back into existence." And in that moment, the world seems to hold its breath. There is no fear in her eyes, no sorrow, no hesitation, only the fierce calm of a woman who has been burned and chosen to rise anyway. The next morning, her interview makes the front page. Headline: "The Woman Who Turned Pain into Purpose." Her story spreads across the country. A mother once betrayed by her own daughter, cast out of her home, now founder of a foundation that protects those who cannot protect themselves. Hundreds of letters pour in, some from elderly victims of fraud, their handwriting shaky with age. Others from children, confessing regret for hurting the very parents who once raised them. Evelyn reads every word. Each letter feels like a mirror, reflecting pieces of the woman she once was, broken, fragile, and then, slowly, healed. By dusk, the house falls quiet. Evelyn walks toward the large window at the end of the hall. The sunset spills across the room like gold silk. Outside, the trees sway gently, bowing in the wind. As if honoring the woman who walked through fire and returned with wings, she closes her eyes and breathes. In her heart, she still sees Charles, the man who kept so many secrets, the man she both loved and lost. "Do you see this, Charles?" she whispers. "I did it. No one can take my life away from me ever again." A soft breeze brushes past her cheek, carrying the faint scent of lavender and rain. It feels like his answer. Evelyn smiles. On the hallway wall, a small wooden plaque reads, "From the ashes we rise." It's more than a motto. It's a vow, carved in truth, born of pain, sealed by survival. The young reporter who interviewed her later wrote, "She didn't look like an old woman. She looked like sunlight, warm, sharp, and alive. She didn't dwell on the past. She simply said, sometimes loss is the only road that leads you back to yourself." And it's true. There are no more courtrooms, no more shouting matches between people who once called themselves family. Just Evelyn, the woman who walked through chaos and chose to stay where the light returns. Her past is no longer a cage. It's her fire, fuel for something greater. Something that lights the way for others lost in the dark corners of their own families. That night, as the building lights dim, Evelyn sits alone in her office. On her desk rests a photo of Charles, and beside it, a letter from her daughter Clara, written from prison. "I don't want the money," the letter says. "I just want your forgiveness." Evelyn folds the paper gently, placing it in a box. No tears, no bitterness, only peace. Forgiveness, she murmurs, isn't about forgetting. It's about choosing peace over revenge. The streetlights outside glow through the window, casting golden light over her face, strong, serene, unbreakable. And in that moment, you see it. The phoenix has risen, not through miracle, but through will. Through pain, through courage, through belief. As dawn breaks, Evelyn rises and opens the window. The first light of morning spills across her silver hair. She smiles. The quiet smile of someone who knows that life can begin again, no matter how many times it's been burned down. In her notebook, a single sentence glimmers in ink. "No one can save us but ourselves. But when we rise, we can save others too." The camera fades out. Evelyn stands at the window, sunlight painting her face, reborn, unbroken, unstoppable.